Magazine. Hello, I am here with Lynsay Gould, Susie Greaves here from Psychologies Magazine. I'm here with Lynsay Gould, who is an amazing podcast business coach, and all month we have been working in Psychologies around how to create an online business, which was our dossier this month. And Lynsay has kindly come along today to talk us through starting a podcast. So, Lynsay, why are podcasts so popular at the moment? What is going on in the world? Why podcasts are the big thing at the moment? Why has everyone got a podcast?
Great question. It's actually a couple of questions, but yeah, you're quite right. They feel like they're everywhere at the moment, don't they? And we were talking just before this about, rather than getting book recommendations now, we seem to be getting podcast recommendations, and that's very true. I think for me there's a few reasons why they're so popular right now. One of them is that we're all doing 100 things at once, aren't we? And it's the sort of thing that you can listen to, you can participate in whilst you're doing other things. So I mentioned before, I'm walking the dog, I'm working, I'm creating whilst I'm listening to a podcast. So I think it's the fact that you can do other things whilst you're listening. And I think, it's very different to something like YouTube, for example, where it's a bit of a mindless scroll. People actually intentionally tune into a podcast episode. They want to learn something, or they want to be entertained. So they're tuning in for that reason. I think they're really popular right now, and they have been throughout lockdown in particular. They've really grown through lockdown. People are wanting connection. And if you look at the difference between something like YouTube and a podcast, in my experience, podcasters tend to be more themselves on a podcast than on video. 100%.
I think there's something, isn't it, where when you're listening or when you're connecting in that way, it feels like there's only just two of you. Sometimes on the screen, I mean, even with this situation, when we're on a split screen, well, you can see yourself and and you have that kind of. But when it's kind of a dark room and you're podcasting together, it feels more intimate, and it feels like there can be a real connection. It's really great. So, I mean, you're a business coach, and we've been seeing, obviously, with the world going into perhaps lockdown again, we see a lot of people looking how to pivot their businesses and how to create a new project online, to create a new business online. So what advice would you give for people who are wanting to, we've been working all month about how to create an online business with Psychologies, with the dossier. But with podcasting, where should we start with that in terms of building an online business?
Yeah, so as you say, pivoting right now is something a lot of people are doing. And if you don't have an online presence right now is the time to do it, for sure, if you haven't done it already. A podcast is a great way to grow an audience. We're finding more and more on social media in particular, it's more of a pay-to-play type platform. So more and more you have to pay to get in front of the people who you want to see your products and services. Podcast is completely free, and you have complete creative reign over what you create. So creating a podcast, as you said before, it's about having an intimate connection with someone. You're in their ears every week. They're waiting for your episode. So pivoting into an online business in particular, a great way to do it is start your podcast. More and more women, there's been some very recent research that more and more women are listening to podcasts now. And the women who are listening to podcasts are probably our key demographic here. They're sort of in their late 20s through to their early 40s. They're solvent, they're educated, they're loyal, they're less likely to be people who are looking at adverts on TV. They're more into subscribing to things. They have things like Netflix. So there are key demographics. So if you're thinking about getting into online business and that is what you're going after in terms of your clients, then a podcast has got to be the thing to do. And it's got such a low barrier to entry. You mentioned before, you can sit in your dark room. You don't need anything other than an internet connection and a microphone to start your podcast. So to me, it's an absolute no-brainer. In the dossier this month, I've written some tips about how to actually get started and the key things to go through. And I've got a gift that I'm going to give all the listeners as well here that will give you a step-by-step in all the things you need to do. But for me, it's not about the tasks. It's not about that, okay, what do I do? It's about that connection. It's about really thinking, who are these people who are listening to my show? Who do I want to listen? What is the business I want to build in the future, and create the podcast for them, rather than where you are right now, because we're all moving and changing and pivoting direction. So think about the business you want to grow into. Who are the people we want to be serving? Who are the people we want to be listening? What are they really struggling with? What are the things they are crying out to hear about? What do they really want to learn? How do they want to listen? So for me, it's not about the tasks. It's about what is behind all of that. What's the strategy? What's the purpose? And not just starting a podcast because you think you should.
Yes.
Never do something because you think you should.
So in terms of just the practical piece of that is to get sort of maybe a big piece of A3 paper, and you maybe put in the middle something like, who are my audience?
Yeah.
And what do they want? And what is their problem? And then
I would go a step back from that, though. So quite often when in online business, we talk about who are our ideal clients. With your podcast, it's about who are my ideal listeners. Now, they may be different people. Your listeners might not be quite ready to work with you. And you're going to use your podcast as a way almost to teach them how to be your ideal client. So you're getting them before they're your ideal client. You're thinking about the things that are going through their mind before they decide to work with somebody like you, or buy your product, or buy your services. So the things that your clients struggle with may be different. So I always say to my clients and students to focus in on the things that your ideal listeners want to hear about. So big A3 sheet of paper, your ideal listener in the middle. I actually have a picture of my ideal listener on my pinboard here, and have somebody to speak to, because the difference you can have your listeners experience by having somebody in your mind who you're talking to is immense, rather than saying, hi, everybody. Hello, you. How are you this week? Talking to them rather than a big audience. It's subtle, but it has a big difference for your listener, and they really do feel like they're connecting with you. So big A3 sheet, who they are, what they're struggling with, what is the purpose of this podcast, what is the business I'm trying to grow, who am I trying to reach, what do they want from me, and how can I give them some quick wins very early on. And that's the key. I think having podcasts where it's just a conversation, they're great to listen to, but more and more we don't have the time. We want to know what to do, how to do it, and go away and action it. So make them, more and more the most popular podcasts are the shorter episodes, because people don't have the attention span.
It's so true. It's so true. So how short?
So it used to be over an hour, but now it's coming right down to less than 15 minutes.
15 minutes. Wow. 15 minutes. Wow.
When it's an interview, they can be longer, and people will invest the time in listening to an interview. Right. But if it's a solo episode where it's just the host and you're teaching something, 15 minutes is key. That's a good number.
I've been talking to a lot of the readers this month about starting online businesses, and we've been chatting about it. And one of the big issues that seems to come up constantly is this kind of imposter syndrome. Yeah. This kind of, who am I to create a podcast? Who am I? Well, I've got nothing to say. How do you coach people through that kind of particular? I think for me, I'm really passionate about creating a platform for lots of women's voices to be heard, and overcome that imposter syndrome, and to really be able to beam out their wisdom and humor and all of the great things that we do. But how do we overcome the imposter syndrome?
Well, that's a big question, and I'd say there's two ways you can think about this. So first of all, I don't believe that you don't have a story. I think everybody has a unique perspective to share, no matter how you feel about whether you don't have a story. Who am I? Nobody's going to listen to me. And believe me, I've heard them all. I've heard every story under the sun about why I shouldn't start something. I think the alternative view is, if you are adamant that you are feeling, actually, I want to start a podcast, I want to get my voice out there, but I'm scared. I'm worried about who's going to judge me. I'm worried about what people are going to think. I'm worried people are going to laugh. Amplifying the voices of others is an amazing way to start. And I did an episode on this during lockdown, actually, the fact that as podcasters, we do have a responsibility, whether we like it or not, to represent our listeners.
Yeah.
So if you are going to use your podcast as a way to amplify others' voices, that is so valid as well. So if you don't want to have a solo show, you don't want to just be you up on stage, so to speak, speaking to your listeners, you can use that platform to amplify the voices of people who don't have a platform like you. So if you are passionate about Black Lives Matter, if you are passionate about nutrition, if you are passionate about whatever it is that you're interested in, speak to other people about that. Have a conversation. And that's what I say to people. Rather than think about this as everybody in the world being able to access this, which they can, anybody, anywhere, use it as a way to connect with people. Have a genuine conversation about something you're interested in. And when you flip your thinking around that and think, actually, I'm just having a chat with a friend here, the dynamic changes a little bit and you start to see that it's possible. So when anybody talks about imposter syndrome to me, it's always about just taking a tiny step, the smallest step that you can take to make you feel like you're having some progress. And I promise you that the moment you start to take that first step, it does give you that confidence to take the next one.
Yes.
And accountability is a big one around that too. Telling people what your plans are, telling them you want to start a podcast, giving them the date you're going to launch, and then use that as a way to keep yourself accountable.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the amplifying other people's voices is a really great point. Katie Piper, who's one of our columnists in the magazine, she has an amazing podcast called Inspirational People. Yeah. And what she does constantly, I mean, her story itself, I mean, I would listen to her all day because she's so wise and interesting and inspirational. However, what she does is she talks to lots of people who are amazing and also have inspirational stories about how they've overcome and it's tragedy and dark stuff, and for me, listening to that, it's as you say, it's such an intimate thing in your ear. I mean, you know, you could be feeling low or you can feeling down, and then you listen to that and you think, wow, you know, it is. I think podcasts are such a great way of connecting with people and reaching people and inspiring people and spreading kind of goodwill into the world, isn't it? It's really fantastic. So if people are listening to this and thinking, yes, I want to start my own podcast, I'm going to they've done the A3 sheet, and you know, there's some resources below where you can give them, you know, what mic to get and all of the things, or read apologies this month where we're going to do it, which is all fantastic. What are the things that we shouldn't do? What are the mistakes that everybody makes? What are the things we should avoid?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So some of the mistakes that newbies make when they're getting started is they think they've got to be something that they're not. They'll put on a voice. They'll try to be different than they are. They think they've got to be larger than life. And quite often, the best podcasters are incredibly introverted people, very quietly spoken, and you wouldn't believe the power of their episodes. So I think a lot of people assume you've got to be a huge personality. You've got to have the right voice. You can't have an accent. You absolutely can have an accent. I'm a good old northern girl and I've got a podcast. You can have any accent. It doesn't matter. The other thing that sort of pulls people back from starting a podcast is they think, I don't have an audience. Who's going to listen to it? So what I would say is your podcast actually helps you to grow an audience. That's the thing that will help you to grow it. So assuming you need a big audience, assuming that you're not going to be able to do the tech, which again, you absolutely will. The guide will help you. Assuming that you don't have the right voice, assuming you don't have the knowledge, assuming nobody's going to listen to you, all of those things. And they do actually tie quite nicely back to the imposter syndrome stuff. It's all the stuff you're telling yourself that is going to stop you. And the reality is that's not even a thing. It's about you, your microphone, and your listener. And if you just think about it as one person that you're speaking to, it changes that for you. It makes you feel able to have those conversations that perhaps you wouldn't do on video or go live on social media with. It makes you braver.
Yeah,
is what I would say to people.
Yeah, and also I think, you know, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I think it's very much about I always think when you get a website up or that you put a podcast, by doing that process, you learn more about yourself, you learn about your business, you learn. So even if you never ever broadcast a podcast, just by going through the process and doing it and thinking it's not quite right, it will teach you something that will take you to the next step. One thing that we all know is by doing nothing, we just stay in the same place.
Oh, 100%. 100%. But the other thing I would say is if you really don't think, oh, I'm not ready to start a podcast of my own, you can go on other people's podcasts as well. And
tell me about that.
Being a guest on other people's podcasts is a great way to figure out whether it's right for you as well. And it's a great way, again, to build your audience and build your expert status, your credibility. So tangible tips for you. If you want to be a guest on a podcast, go to iTunes, go to Spotify and research which shows you would like to be on. Get a list of your top 20 that you would love to be on. Start at number 20, pitch to them and work your way up to number 1. Like my number 1 would be Michelle Obama's new podcast. I mean, it's incredible. I'm really not going to pitch to Michelle Obama yet, but one day I will. Start at number 20 and go through. I've got in the guide that I'm sharing with you, it will show you how to pitch to be on other people's podcasts as well.
Lovely.
So there's an email in there, copy and paste, change a few bits and you can go and pitch to be on them. So you don't have to have your own. You don't need to deal with all of the tech at the start. You can go on and be a guest and still get your voice heard and amplify your message.
And also try it out and just see how it works, see how you feel. And, you know, I always think you get better, don't you? That's the thing. You get better, whether it's on video, whether it's podcasting or whether it's writing. Again, what happens is if you don't do anything, you just stay the same. So, you know, psychologies, it's all about learning new skills and then just do it, try it, make it happen. And this is what your message is, what I see. And we're encouraging all of our readers to try something differently. I mean, whether it's a side hustle, whether it's a complete career pivot, right now is the time to learn new online skills. I think, Lynsay, what you're teaching is absolutely invaluable. Thank you so much for joining us today. Below you can see Lynsy's giving away free guides for us, all sorts of things. So thank you so much for that. And thank you for all your wisdom today.
You're so welcome. And what I would say, a final thought is today is International Podcasting Day. So today is the best day out of any day in the year to think, okay, what does this mean for me? What is it going to look like for me? So download the guide and then you can get started on your journey. So thanks so much for having me, Susie. It's been lovely.
You're welcome. But I think maybe the baby step is maybe to tune into your podcast. Do give a plug. What's your podcast?
Thank you. My show is called Podcasting for Business. It's on all podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen.
Yeah, fantastic. All right. Tune into Lynsy's podcast and start today on National Podcasting Day. Lots of love, Lynsay, and speak to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.